Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at some really interesting English words and phrases.
Oh, cool.
The kind that, you might hear and understand, basically, but there's like a whole hidden world of meaning underneath.
Yeah, for sure.
So we've got some great sources that you shared with us that
Mhm.
really dive into Nemesis, Under the Weather, Read Between the Lines,
Okay.
and Take Off.
Yeah.
So
Those are good ones.
I think you're interested in expanding your vocabulary, how English really works.
Right.
So we're going to unpack these words, their origins, and kind of what they tell us about communication today.
I am excited to dig into these.
Yeah.
These are great examples of how language evolves and how even simple words can carry a lot of cultural baggage.
Yeah, for sure. Let's start with nemesis.
Okay.
It's a word that just has this weight to it, this sense of inevitable conflict. I always think of those classic superhero rivalries, like Batman and the Joker.
Right.
You know?
You're hitting on something important there, that sense of an ongoing struggle.
Right.
A nemesis isn't just any opponent. It's one that seems almost fated, someone who challenges you again and again,
Right.
forcing you to confront your weaknesses.
That's interesting that you bring up fate because the word itself comes from Greek mythology, right?
Exactly. Nemesis was the goddess of retribution.
Oh, wow.
And her job was to bring down those who were too arrogant or prideful.
Okay.
That's where we get that sense of inevitability, that idea that a nemesis is a force you can't escape.
So it's not just about having an enemy, it's about having an enemy that, like, reveals something about you,
Yes.
about your flaws.
Absolutely. A true nemesis exposes your vulnerabilities.
Okay.
And often the conflict isn't just about winning, but about learning and growing as a result of the challenge.
Wow. So how do we use nemesis today? Is it always this dramatic, epic struggle?
Not necessarily. It can be used in a more everyday sense, too.
Okay.
Like that calculus exam has been my nemesis all semester or something like that. It's still a challenge, an obstacle,
Yeah,
but maybe not on a life or death scale.
I love that. So everyone can relate to having a nemesis,
Right.
whether it's a tough subject, a rival at work,
Yeah,
or that one sock that always goes missing in the laundry.
exactly. But I think that connection to the mythological origin still lingers.
Yeah.
We use nemesis when we want to emphasize the significance of that challenge, that
Yeah.
it's not just a minor annoyance.
Okay, so we've got this image of a nemesis as a powerful opponent, a force that pushes us to our limits. Let's shift gears now to something a little more, shall we say, low-key.
Okay.
Let's talk about under the weather.
Right.
I use this phrase all the time, but I've never really stopped to think about where it comes from.
You're not alone. It's one of those idioms that we just kind of accept without questioning.
Right.
But its origin is actually pretty fascinating.
Okay.
It comes from the world of sailing,
Oh, really?
back when ships were powered by wind, and braving the elements was a much bigger deal.
So are we talking about actual weather here?
Literally. When sailors were feeling seasick or unwell,
Oh.
they would go below deck to escape the harsh conditions.
Huh.
They were literally going under the weather.
So they were seeking shelter from the storm, just like we might want to do when we're feeling sick.
Exactly. And it's amazing how that image has persisted.
Right.
Even though most of us aren't sailing the high seas these days,
Yeah.
we still use this phrase to describe feeling ill.
But it's not just a synonym for sick, is it? There's a certain nuance to under the weather.
You're right. Under the weather implies a temporary mild illness.
Yeah.
It's not serious enough to warrant a doctor's visit, but it's enough to make you want to take a break and rest.
It's almost like a way of downplaying your illness, making it seem less dramatic.
Exactly. It's a softer way of saying you're not feeling your best.
So when I tell my boss I'm under the weather, it's like I'm hinting that I need a mental health day,
Right.
not that I'm at death's door.
Precisely. It's a subtle way of communicating without having to go into too much detail.
So it's not just what you say, it's how you say it.
Right.
These little idioms pack a lot of information into a few words.
And that's what makes language so fascinating. It's not just about conveying information, it's about conveying it in a way that's appropriate for the situation
Right.
and the relationship between the speakers.
And that's a perfect segue to our next phrase, read between the lines.
Okay.
This one always feels so mysterious, like a secret code you need to crack.
It does, doesn't it? And in a way, it is a bit like a code.
Uh-huh.
Reading between the lines means understanding the unspoken, the implied meanings
Right.
that aren't explicitly stated.
So it's about picking up on those subtle cues, these
Yeah.
things that people are hinting at but not saying directly.
Exactly. And it can be a really valuable skill,
Yeah.
especially in social situations or when trying to understand someone's intentions.
I feel like this is a skill we use all the time, especially in the age of like text messages and emails,
Right.
where tone can be so hard to convey.
Yeah.
You're always trying to figure out what are they really trying to say here?
You hit the nail on the head. And that's where reading between the lines comes in.
Right.
It's about being attuned to the subtext, to the nuances of communication that go beyond the literal words.
So how do you get better at reading between the lines? Are there any like tips or tricks?
Well, one key is to pay attention to context.
Okay.
What's the situation? Who are you talking to? What's their relationship to you?
Mm-hmm.
All of these factors can influence the hidden meaning behind their words.
It's like being a detective, piecing together clues to understand the bigger picture.
Exactly. And just like a good detective, you need to be observant and pay attention to all the details.
Okay.
Tone of voice, body language, even the choice of words can all provide valuable insights.
So it's not just about what people say, it's about how they say it and the context in which they say it.
Absolutely. Reading between the lines
Mm-hmm.
requires us to be active listeners, to engage with the message on multiple levels.
Right.
It's a skill that takes practice, but can be incredibly rewarding.
And speaking of things that can be both rewarding and a little challenging,
Okay.
let's talk about our last phrase for this part of our deep dive, take off.
Right.
It seems straightforward, but when you start to think about it, this simple phrase can mean so many different things.
It's a great example of how English can be both incredibly versatile and incredibly confusing,
Right.
especially for people learning the language.
Yeah.
2 little words, so many possibilities.
So let's unpack those possibilities.
Okay.
Where do we even begin with take off?
Well, I think the most obvious meaning is the literal one, to remove something, like take off your hat or take off your shoes.
Right, that's the one we probably learned first. It's physical, straightforward, but then things get more interesting when you think about the other meanings of take off.
Exactly. And I think a good place to start is with that image of an airplane taking off.
Okay, I can see where you're going with this.
No.
It's about sudden upward movement, a departure from a fixed point.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea of sudden upward movement can be applied metaphorically to all sorts of situations.
Like when we say someone's career took off.
Exactly. It suggests a rapid ascent, a sudden burst of success. And that imagery is so powerful. It's not just that their career is doing well.
Right.
It's that it's soaring. It's gaining momentum quickly.
So takeoff can be about physical removal,
Mm-hmm.
sudden upward movement, and then there's that other meaning we often hear, to leave quickly, to depart suddenly.
Right. Think about phrases like, I'm going to take off now, or they took off without saying goodbye.
Right.
There's a sense of urgency, of abruptness in those instances.
And it's interesting how the meaning can shift so subtly depending on the context.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's neutral, sometimes it suggests excitement,
Right.
and sometimes it implies something negative, like a hasty retreat.
That's the beauty and the challenge of phrasal verbs.
Yeah.
They often rely on context and subtle cues to convey their full meaning. It's like they have this hidden layer of information that you need to unlock.
It's fascinating how a single phrase can be so versatile. And it makes me wonder, do any other languages have anything quite like phrasal verbs in English?
That's a great question. While other languages certainly have verbs that combine with prepositions or adverbs to create different meanings,
Okay.
English phrasal verbs are known for their sheer number and complexity. They're a real hallmark of the language.
And a source of endless frustration for anyone trying to learn English as a second language.
I can imagine. It's not just about memorizing vocabulary. It's
Right.
about understanding the subtle ways in which these verbs change their meaning depending on the preposition or adverb they're paired with.
It's like a secret code that you need to crack.
Exactly. And once you start to understand the logic behind phrasal verbs,
Yeah.
it opens up a whole new level of fluency and understanding.
Okay, we've talked about decoding those hidden meanings in phrases like read between the lines.
Mhm.
And we've seen how take off can take on multiple meanings. But what about those times when we're struggling to find the right words at all?
You mean that dreaded tip of the tongue phenomenon?
Exactly. You know, the word exists, you can almost taste it,
Yeah.
but you just can't quite spit it out.
It's one of the most frustrating experiences, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
It's like having a word on the edge of your consciousness, but it just slips away every time you try to grasp it.
And it always seems to happen with the most important words, the ones you really need in that moment.
Right. Like during a job interview or a presentation,
Oh, yeah.
you're trying to sound eloquent and intelligent,
Uh-huh.
and suddenly your brain decides to play hide and seek with your vocabulary.
I've even tried describing the word I'm looking for,
Yeah,
but it's like trying to explain a color to someone who's never seen it.
I know exactly what you mean. You start throwing out synonyms and examples,
Right.
hoping something will jog your memory, but it just makes the frustration worse.
And then